Emerging Threats Hub. The Siege of Hormuz, a new kind of war, and the world it's making.
What happens when the world's most vital waterway becomes a battlefield? Not a hypothetical question, not a war game scenario. Right now, in the Strait of Hormuz, a new kind of conflict is unfolding, one that doesn't fit neatly into our old categories of peace or war. It's something in between, something that's reshaping the global order in ways most headlines miss. Welcome to Emerging Threats Hub. I'm Sebastian. Today, we're doing something different. We're not just tracking a single story, we're looking at the connective tissue between crises, because that's what's happening. The conflict in the Strait of Hormuz isn't an isolated event, it's a system failure. And that failure is rippling outward, forcing Europe to confront its own defense vulnerabilities, reshaping the war in Ukraine, and even redrawing alliances from the Indo-Pacific to the Horn of Africa. Here's what we'll cover in the next 30 minutes. First, we go deep into what analysts are calling the chokepoint war, the escalating confrontation between the United States and Iran over the Strait of Hormuz. We'll look at why Project Freedom collapsed and what that means for global energy security. Then, we turn to Europe. The US troop withdrawal from Germany isn't just a logistical shift. It's forcing a generational reckoning. Can Europe build its own defense architecture in time? After that, Ukraine. The ceasefire that didn't hold, and the battlefield innovations that are changing warfare forever. And finally, we go under the radar to explore the invisible battlefield that Russia and China are already winning, the war over reality itself. Let's begin.
The chokepoint war.
Picture this. You're the captain of a commercial oil tanker. You're transiting the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman, barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. 20% of the world's oil passes through here every single day. And now, you're being hailed by Iranian Revolutionary Guard fast attack craft. They're telling you to heave to, to stop. Behind them, you can see Iranian shore-based anti-ship missiles, aimed and ready. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is the new normal. Let me give you the current state of play. The United States and Iran are locked in a high-stakes conflict over this waterway. It's oscillating between ceasefire declarations that last for hours and open naval skirmishes. The U.S. launched what it called Project Freedom, an effort to guarantee safe passage for commercial shipping. But according to multiple reports from Defense Priorities and URC, that project has effectively collapsed. Why? Because Iran has spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of fight. They've invested in what strategists call asymmetric warfare: mines, swarms of small attack boats, anti-ship cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles that can reach any vessel in the Gulf. The U.S. Navy, for all its technological superiority, is facing a fundamental problem. It's built for blue water battles, carrier groups, destroyers, submarine warfare. Iran has built for brown water warfare, close quarters, shallow waters, where speed and numbers can overwhelm sophisticated defenses. Let me read you something from a RUSI analysis that caught my attention. They argue that the Strait of Hormuz is not a military problem that can be solved by military means alone, because every time the U.S. sends a destroyer to escort a tanker, it becomes a target. Every show of force raises the stakes. And here's where we need to step back and apply our analytical lens. From a constructivist perspective, what's happening here isn't just a clash of material interests, oil, shipping lanes, military power. It's a clash of identities. The U.S. sees itself as the guarantor of the global commons, the protector of the international order. Iran sees itself as a revolutionary state, resisting Western domination. These identities are real. They shape behavior. But they're not fixed. They're constructed, and they can be reconstructed. The question is, what would it take to reconstruct the relationship? Jennifer Kavanaugh from Defense Priorities has been making a compelling argument. She says that what we're seeing is the making of a forever war, not because either side wants it, but because neither side has a clear off-ramp. The US can't afford to lose face. Iran can't afford to appear weak. So both sides escalate, then de-escalate, then escalate again. But there's a path forward. It involves treating this not as a military problem, but as a diplomatic one. Reopening the JCPOA nuclear deal. Establishing a regional security dialogue that includes Iran's legitimate security concerns. Creating mechanisms for deconfliction that don't require the US to play global policeman. Is that naive? Realists would say yes. They'd argue that Iran is a revisionist power, that the only language it understands is force. But constructivism offers a different reading. Identities can change. Interests can be redefined. The same Iranian state that held Americans hostage in 1979 also negotiated the JCPOA in 2015. That's not inconsistency. That's the product of different ideas, different leadership, different international contexts.
The ripple effect, Europe's wake-up call.
Now, let me show you how this Hormuz crisis connects to something you might think is completely unrelated: the US troop withdrawal from Germany. The numbers are significant. The US is pulling out tens of thousands of troops from bases across Europe, from Stuttgart to Ramstein to Grafenwohr. For decades, these bases weren't just military installations, they were physical embodiments of the transatlantic alliance. They said, "America is here. America will protect you." That assumption is now being questioned, not just by Washington, but by European capitals themselves. A recent analysis from Eurusi and Euractiv paints a stark picture. Europe has what they call a strike gap, a critical vulnerability in long-range precision strike capability. If Russia were to reconstitute its forces, and intelligence suggests it could do so by 2027, Europe would face a 2-year window where its conventional forces are simply insufficient. The numbers are sobering. To close this gap, European NATO members would need to increase defense spending by approximately 50 billion euros per year. That's not pocket change. But compared to the economic cost of a war, it's a bargain. Here's where it gets interesting from a constructivist perspective. France has proposed extending its nuclear umbrella to European partners. Now, a realist would say this is impossible. No country would risk its own nuclear annihilation for another. But France is making exactly that offer. Why? Because the idea of European solidarity, of a shared civilizational identity, is being reconstructed in response to a perceived threat. Germany, for its part, is fretting about long-range missiles and its own defense industrial base. Small towns that have hosted American troops for generations are facing economic disruption. But there's also a deeper anxiety. For decades, Germany built its post-war identity around being a civilian power, a country that doesn't project military force. That identity is being challenged. The question is, can Europe build a new identity, one that includes a credible defense capability, without abandoning its commitment to diplomacy, human rights, and international law? The answer, from a constructivist lens, is yes, but only if European leaders actively work to construct it. It won't happen automatically. It requires shared ideas, shared narratives, shared political will.
The Ukrainian crucible.
Let's shift to Ukraine, because the war there is acting as a laboratory for the future of conflict. And what's happening is remarkable. First, the headline. The Victory Day ceasefire, the one that was supposed to signal a pause in hostilities, collapsed within hours. Both sides blamed each other, and frankly, both sides were right. Ceasefires in this war have never held, not because they're impossible in principle, but because neither side believes the other will honor them. And that belief is self-reinforcing. But here's what I want to focus on. The battlefield innovation happening in Ukraine is unprecedented in modern warfare. Ground robots. Not the kind you see in sci-fi movies. Clunky, remote-controlled platforms that can evacuate wounded soldiers from the front lines. Advanced drones that are terrifying Russian forces and fundamentally changing the calculus of ground warfare. A recent article from the Small Wars Journal documented how Ukrainian engineers have developed drone systems that can identify, track, and engage targets with a level of precision that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. This matters for 3 reasons. First, it's changing the cost-benefit analysis of war. A drone that costs $50,000 can destroy a tank that costs $5 million. That's an order of magnitude shift in military economics. Second, it's changing who can fight. You don't need years of training to operate these systems. You need technical literacy and courage, and those are distributed much more widely than traditional military skills. Third, it's changing the nature of escalation. When the threshold for attack becomes lower, when you can strike without putting your own soldiers at risk, the temptation to use force increases. That's a dangerous dynamic. The solution-oriented question is, how do we manage this technological revolution without triggering an arms race that makes conflict more likely? One answer comes from arms control, the same logic that produced treaties limiting nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and anti-personnel mines could be applied to autonomous weapons systems. But that requires a level of international cooperation that currently seems distant. Another answer is normative, building a global taboo against certain uses of autonomous weapons, treating the delegation of life and death decisions to machines as fundamentally illegitimate. This is a constructivist approach, changing the ideas and norms that govern behavior, rather than just trying to regulate material capabilities.
Under the radar, the cognitive battlefield.
Now, time to go under the radar. This week we're looking at a threat that most people don't see, but that's shaping every conflict we've discussed today. Cognitive warfare. What is it? It's not just propaganda. It's not just disinformation. It's something deeper. As one RUSI analysis put it, cognitive warfare is the weaponization of reality itself. The idea is simple. If you can control how people perceive the world, you can control how they act. If you can make a population distrust its own institutions, you don't need to invade them. If you can create confusion about what's true and what's false, you can paralyze decision-making. Russia has been doing this for years. The Internet Research Agency, that troll farm in St. Petersburg, wasn't just trying to influence elections. It was trying to erode the very concept of objective truth. If nothing is true, then everything is permitted. China, too, is invested heavily in what strategists call narrative warfare. The goal isn't just to promote Chinese interests. It's to create an alternative information ecosystem where Chinese narratives dominate, where the Belt and Road Initiative is always a success, where Xinjiang always has peace and prosperity, where Taiwan is always an inseparable part of China. The Pentagon is now defining cognitive warfare as a distinct domain of conflict alongside land, sea, airspace, and cyberspace. And they're right to do so. Because this is the war that happens before the shooting starts. It's the war that shapes whether a population supports or opposes military action. It's the war that determines whether international coalitions hold together or fragment. Here's the solution-oriented angle. The best defense against cognitive warfare isn't censorship. It's resilience. A population that is media literate, that understands how propaganda works, that has access to diverse sources of information. That population is much harder to weaponize. This is where constructivism offers a powerful insight. The information environment is not a neutral space. It's constructed by human choices, by the algorithms we design, the platforms we build, the regulations we enact. We can choose to build an information ecosystem that rewards truth and punishes manipulation. Or we can continue down the current path, where engagement is prioritized over accuracy, and where the most outrageous content spreads the fastest. The choice is ours, but we have to make it consciously.
The path forward.
So, let's bring this together. What have we learned? We've seen that the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a military standoff. It's a failure of the international system to manage shared resources and competing identities. We've seen that the US troop withdrawal from Germany is forcing Europe to confront its own vulnerability, and that the response, whether effective or not, will be shaped by the ideas and narratives that European leaders embrace. We've seen that Ukraine is becoming a crucible for military innovation, with drones and robots changing the fundamental nature of warfare. And we've seen that the most dangerous battlefield may be the one inside our heads, the cognitive domain where reality itself is contested. The connective tissue here is not material. It's ideational. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we value, and how we should act. A realist would look at this landscape and see a permanent struggle for power, a world where conflict is inevitable, where trust is naive, where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. But a constructivist sees something different, a world where the rules are made, not discovered, where identities can evolve, where cooperation is possible, not because humans are naturally good, but because we have the capacity to build institutions, norms, and shared understandings that make cooperation rational. The path forward, then, is not just about building better weapons or stronger alliances. It's about building smarter diplomatic frameworks, faster crisis communication channels, more resilient information ecosystems, and a deeper commitment to the idea that international politics doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. The question I want to leave you with is this: are we innovating for peace as quickly as we are innovating for war? I'm Sebastian, and this has been Emerging Threats Hub. If you found value in this episode, please share it with someone who needs to understand these connections. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay analytical, and never stop questioning the stories you're told.